All right, folks, welcome into a very special edition of the Crowd Assist podcast. I am Ty B, and I'll be joined by Kevin Massare. We're going to be breaking down our initial reactions to the 53-man roster reveal. We don't have everything just yet, but almost all the announcements have been made. But first, a shout out our show sponsor, Picasso's Pizza. If you're looking for anything for your personal tailgates and watching these Bills games, go no further than Picasso's Pizza, picassospizza.net, I believe, to place your orders online. Tons of locations all across Buffalo. Make sure you get to Picasso's for all your needs. Kev, first thoughts on this reveal right now. What are you thinking about the roster not being fully out there right now? We're almost closing in on 4:30 right now.
Yeah, I mean, there's got to be something in the works. Usually it's pretty straightforward. You submit the paperwork, it's a fax. It's probably still a fax. You send that in, it's done. And there's got to be something that the Bills are waiting on, particularly a trade announcement. Even more than a trade for picks, which is usually easily straightforward. I would lean toward maybe a trade player for player trade. And if it didn't get done in time, that means the Bills need to cut someone they maybe weren't expecting to cut. Potentially. So there's a couple of factors there that go into why it could be delayed, and if they're willing to wait it out or have to cut an extra player and risk them on waivers, or if they were able to get a trade in time. But I mean, my initial thoughts were, we know 7 receivers made the roster. We don't know what's going on with Foster. We know Duke Williams got cut. So the initial thoughts were, does Brandon Beane send Foster through waivers if he doesn't get a deal, or does he keep him? Like, did you keep 8 receivers at least for a day or two, knowing that you're going to trade one and say, hey, I don't have to do anything. We think he's worth an asset. I'll keep him for right now and until we need to get rid of him. So, one of my initial points, Ty, is, what are your thoughts on Brandon Beane saying, we think he's got value, especially with looking around the league, receiver is super weak. I mean, there's teams converting players, or teams converting running backs. I mean, it's a bad position group. Why, if it's an asset, yes, you need to have inactives on game day anyways. So if it's an asset, why be forced to do something you don't want to do? So, I mean, that's kind of my initial thoughts as we see, as we're still waiting for the final word on the final, maybe 5 or 6 cuts.
Yeah, it looks like Justin Zimmer is the next casualty of the Bills defensive tackle. Another practice squad candidate, Ryan Talbot, is reporting right now. But yeah, I think this is great asset management. If you're Beane, at least you're going up to the wire, you're pushing it. You're not letting this cut out early. Let these teams know that this guy's going to be available immediately. If these teams want him, they don't have to, they can jump the waivers line and make a trade right here. You look at what the Jets have at receiver. It's an anemic receiving core there, and they've been dealing with some injuries on top of that. A lot of teams are in similar situations as well, and you got to think, Brandon Beane might be holding, an extra ace in his hand that that we don't know about here, and that could be what this delay is all about. And I guess
just don't cut assets
in the next couple of minutes.
You don't cut assets. And I mean, you don't want that stacked position group. A 7's already a lot specifically for this team. But can you do it if you don't carry a fullback? Yeah, you might be able to do it. Can you do it? We'll see. Former Reggie Gilliam of the MAC did make the roster as of right now. So looked at as a tight end, but maybe that combo player, tight end, fullback player, especially with Tommy Sweeney, maybe he's keeping the seat warm for Tommy there on that position group. And they're keeping a lot of offensive linemen at this point. We've heard of no cuts. Evan Baines on the roster as of right now, obviously tying Secchi, Darrell Williams, some of those key names there. We haven't heard anything on Victor Saleko, a guy that they were said to really like. Ryan Bates made the roster. Ike Butker made the roster. And you got to keep John Feliciano. So he's someone you can put on IR in 24 hours after this is all done, and free up a spot there for a waiver claim. So we'll see. I mean, until I see Foster's cut, I'm not going to believe they're just going to throw him through waivers. Like I said, especially with as weak as the receiver group. If it was a strong position, maybe linebacker, you might have to cut him. Like, you're not going to really get anything for him.
Yeah. I think that'd be a perfect play if you didn't have to, hold on to Feliciano the way you do right now, to put him on IR. So I think that's where it complicates that theory a little bit, although they could still do it, because you're going to be able to more than likely sign at least one of these guys back within 24 hours. You look at sort of the rates of waiver claims over the past couple seasons. I think it was less than like 11% of guys get claimed after these cuts. So you got to think most of these guys, if you have 2 or 3 offensive linemen that were right on the cusp of this roster, you're more than likely going to have your opportunity at getting 2, if not all 3 of those guys back tomorrow or within the next week, if you're able to make some other moves, do some maneuvers. So I think, that could still be a possibility with them. Like,
Right.
you don't know right now. You just really don't. We're just all trying to guess and get in the mind of Brandon Beane. We've seen him make a lot of very smart, calculated moves in the past. It could be another one right here, but we don't know yet.
Yeah, and shout out to Damone Harris for making Kansas City's roster.
Yep.
Former UB player. Cam Lewis, we'll talk about him for a minute. I think a priority free agent for Buffalo, a guy that many 50-50 on making the roster. I think it came down to him playing slot and the Bills being happy with Taron Johnson, as well as having Saran Neal there. Mm-hmm. The numbers didn't work in his favor, although they like him. So he's a guy to watch out for. I don't think there's a ton of film on him to get claimed. But I also think we're assuming claims happen at a lower clip than they usually do. I don't think we know that for sure. With the health protocols, teams can't work out as many players. Do they have to do more claims to cycle them more? We're not 100% sure exactly yet. I think it's easy to say, like, yeah, we're going to assume that these guys aren't going to get as claimed at the clip that we're used to. But do we know that? Do we know that for sure, that it could go up because whatever health protocol reasons, we need to at least bring him in and then we'll cycle him if he's not the guy we want in practice. We can't see him. We don't have any practice, or we don't have any preseason footage on him. Mm-hmm. Let's bring him in. We have 3 floating roster spots, call it, in this scenario, and we'll cycle him. I mean, they weren't able to do that this year. So there's nothing that says that that's going to go down. That's my point, is that we're assuming that through this situation that waiver claims are going to be less, and maybe might be the case as we approach week 1, but we don't know for sure yet how that's going to play out, especially with the injuries, with the 3-week IR rule time. Yeah. That could mean that people are willing to take more chances. They can put people on IR and free up more roster spots. So there are different scenarios that don't just lean toward a player definitely not getting claimed because of the situation that we're in now. So it could turn out to be like that, but I think it's something to watch on the next 48 hours. If that's true, that that number's going to go down that you were talking about, or up. I'm still not positive it goes down for sure. I think it could tick up. So we'll have to see exactly how this all plays out. I think the injury rule is as big of a rule as anything for that ticking up. So we'll have to see, especially just tomorrow happens and they start putting 2 or 3 guys on IR. You have 2 or 3 roster spots. You're going to claim people. So we're going to have to see exactly how this plays out in the next couple of days. If they just go back and take their own players, or if they are going out and taking a look at Cam Lewis or other players that were our priority free agents. And so maybe that leads to Bills knowing that they're worried about putting players on waivers. I think that's kind of an issue. If you have an asset in the hand at a position like receiver, I know that Beane's going to play that out and potentially not want to cut him down to especially, I mean, you're seeing draft picks from this year getting traded before even playing the week 1. I mean, we're talking about day 2 draft picks, not 7th round picks. You're talking about guys that were potentially looked at doing something for their rosters this year and converting to receiver. Lynn Bowden is converting to receiver. Yep. So
that was one of the crazier moves I think I've seen so far today. Is the trade of Lynn Bowden. He was a third round pick, I believe, and he's getting moved. For basically a swap of a 5th and 6th round pick. Like, that's just a very weird move. Some of these moves that John Gruden makes, giving guys, decently big signing bonuses and cutting them, almost immediately. I don't know what he's doing sometimes. Like, is he just trying to burn money? I have no clue. Like, the Raiders are just like a huge question mark for me this year. They could do pretty much anything. But I'm really hoping the Bills can bring back Cam Lewis, at least in a practice squad position right away, because I think if you get some injuries at the cornerback spot, you've already had some soft tissue injuries adding up a little bit back there. If these linger, you're going to need some guys can step in right away, guys who know the defense. But I don't know. We'll see about that. But we got a comment here. Why did the Bills trade for Andre Smith and cut him? I've seen some stuff, I think some speculation by Joe B that he thinks Brandon Beane still has some sort of plan for him. What are you thinking about that one?
Yeah, a couple things on that. I think I've talked about this on Twitter a little bit on him, is that there's a 3 to 4 day protocol now with clearing someone for COVID and playing for your team. So by having him on the books, they traded a 2023 future pick, by the way. So by exposing him to waivers, meaning anyone can take him, I think that would not satisfy the condition, though it could be if he's on your active roster for 10 weeks, 12 weeks. We'll have to see the exact conditions of that trade. But exposing him to waivers, meaning you're saying, hey, anyone can take him, should mean that they don't give up a pick. So no harm, no foul. From there, they want to have him in the system. They want to obviously put him on the practice squad, I would assume, unless he came in and was awful. You don't know that he came in, didn't adapt to the playbook, didn't do something right in the special teams rooms. You don't know exactly. Assuming that's not the case, you're going to obviously say, we're going to put this guy in the practice squad. You can activate 2 extra practice squad guys per game.
Yep.
So he could be in that category of activating from the practice squad, and then maybe call him up either when you put someone on IR or if an injury happens. There's a couple of things. You have him in the system. Like we talked about, you're planning on these claims not happening this year. So you're going to throw him right through there, save a roster spot, go back to it if you need him. And then until then, you have him through the protocols, maybe figuring you might use him as that practice squad 2-player call up against the Jets here next weekend. So I think that's the initial thoughts. Once again, had they wasted a 3rd-round pick or 4th, something like that, then I think it's a bigger question, being, potentially made a bad deal there. But until that wasn't the case, and that you're talking about a pick in 3 years, on top of, I do think that they're going to, as long as he doesn't get claimed, and if he does, no pick would be involved. As long as that doesn't happen, they have plans for him, but it's that health protocols. You didn't want to have to. Bean knew he was going to get cut, so it was, getting it on the roster, getting him into the playbook, and I think he's taken a little bit of a risk exposing him to waivers. That's the more risky part of this. Exposing him to waivers, another team wants a special team where he gets claimed. So we'll see, Ty. If the tick is down on the waiver claims, no harm, no foul. If the tick is up, he could be in that category of a guy that looking to be brought in because he plays teams so well.
Yep. And another interesting move, the Patriots just cut their rookie kicker, Rohrwasser, who they selected earlier than Tyler Bass was this year. Speaking about those extra practice squad spots this year, with sort of the uncertainty over COVID, do you think that Bean's going to be looking at adding a kicker to one of those practice squad spots just in case something happens?
For sure. You have to have one. I mean, if teams are talking about 3 and 4 quarterbacks, when usually you take 2, maybe 2.5 with one on the practice squad. You'd have to worry about kicker. If something happens with you have a guy not even in the system, then the 3-day rule we were just talking about.
Yep.
You're either going to do something, you're going to look for a kicker that lower budget kicker you'd assume to put on the practice squad and have ready. And their old friend Chase McLaughlin, a guy they had in camp last year who potentially beat out Hauschka last year, at least did in the preseason. And then later on they put a waiver claim in for him, so you don't know if they're going to cut Hauschka at that point, is free. And I'm going to imagine the Bills are going to at least make an effort to they're going to try to put someone like him on the practice squad if he clears. If he doesn't clear, I don't know. I mean, I think it's almost a spot where McDermott was asked if you keep 2 kickers, and he said yeah. So the assumption was Hauschka and Bass at the time. Now without Hauschka, maybe you roster a $500,000 kicker and activate him on game days just because he's ready to go. You don't even have to deal with another team poaching your practice squad players, which still does exist. So there's 100% going to be a kicker on the practice squad. I couldn't tell you if it's going to be as soon as 48 hours or come week 1, week 2. But they're going to have one on top of the Tyler Bassett rookie. So if something happens there with his consistency, all that aside, they'll at least start by activating a second kicker, or maybe make him the guy that's eligible on game day.
And I was going to say, I believe you can have up to 3 or 4 players on the practice squad this year who have 4+ years of experience.
6.
So 6. Yeah. So you can add a couple, can add a kicker who has some legitimate NFL experience too. Right there on the practice squad to back up Bass. It doesn't necessarily have to be another young guy who's, maybe seen 1 or 2 games of experience, or none at all. So I think that sort of lends itself to some confidence, if you will, for Brandon Beane, knowing that you can have a legitimate backup here that's not taking up one of your 53 roster spots on a daily basis, but has some legitimate experience and you can lean on if you really have to. And I think, that leaves you in a good spot there. And, let's hope you don't have to revert to that. Let's hope Tyler Bass can continue what we've seen from him so far in training camp. Obviously, you're not getting, every report of what's going on with the kicks and whatnot, but it seems like he's been very successful Sean McDermott's been very complimentary of him. He's been handling everything we've thrown at him, I believe, is one of the quotes. So you got to hope you can continue that. And if he's able to kick the way he has, and I mean, his overall kicking accuracy last year in college wasn't phenomenal, but if you look at some of the conditions he was kicking in and some of the spots he was kicking from, not the most ideal conditions. Obviously the hashes are further out.
Right.
It's a little bit tougher there when you're in college. And then also, kicking in the rain and the wind, he had to deal with that, and he nailed some big kicks, especially that one you saw for the walk-off in the bowl game. And as soon as he struck it, he knew it was through, and I believe it was like a 48-yarder
against EMU, baby.
Cleared by probably a good solid 10 yards. So I love the cut of his jib. Hopefully he can keep it up.
Yeah, I mean, it's an underrated position to talk about because people are saying Tyler Bass won the kicking job, and he obviously did. But what happens behind him, it's not as straightforward as a normal year. They're going to have another guy. And do they have another guy ready on game day in case? We'll see if that's a potential statistical thing that they find to use as one of the 2 game day extra additions to the roster too. So we'll see how that plays out. I think it'll be really interesting to see. Do you go with a special teamer? Do you go with a kicker? Who do you use on these 2 spots? They have to be on the practice squad, so it's not part of the 55-man roster. And then from there, they can be activated. So it's interesting that you can play those 2 guys, but not guys that are on your active roster. You still have to have inactives. So it's an interesting concept that I think you can place them on your roster, but I don't think they can. Like there's weird stipulations on if they can play or not. They can be added to the day roster, and then from there, they can be eligible to play, I think, is the situation. One of them has to be an offensive lineman. If you don't have 8 already, the Bills will have plenty of offensive linemen in this scenario. They're given way too many in the first place, and they'll probably have 8 active on game day anyway. So therefore, those 2 spots can be utilized however they would like. It's really an offensive line rule, Ty. I mean, it was, if our offensive line gets sick, hurt, whatever, we need to have backup plans.
Yeah, you got to think about it. We saw this happen to the Oklahoma football team. One of their player position groups was completely eliminated at one point a few months ago in their preseason training because of COVID. If you have all these guys who are normally, in the same room together, practicing together, doing the same drills together, if one of them gets it, it's likely to spread to all of them in that situation. So yes, like you need to have that sort of flexibility, I think, by adding that and having a lot of these meetings still being virtual, and continuing social distancing just in case. It seems that all these players have been taking it quite seriously. We haven't seen any pictures of them out in public anywhere. So that's a very, very good sign right now. Hopefully that continues, because the best availability, or the best ability, is availability. Everyone knows that. So if we can keep the starting lineup out there every week, we'll have a great chance of going far this season.
And as we're still, 40 minutes in from the deadline, things are still trickling in here from teams. So obviously the Bills have a reason to not have launched who they're cutting. So we'll see. I think plenty of teams are in around the league. You're talking about at least 20 plus more teams that have released these results. So we're waiting to see these final, I guess, before those come in, we can kind of take a look around what's already happened. We talked about receiver, obviously the 3 starting receivers are on the roster. They cut Duke Williams, looking to put him on the practice squad. Isaiah McKenzie made the roster, obviously Gabe Davis, Andre Roberts, and Isaiah Hodgins. So we don't know what's going on with Robert Foster. We've talked about that. So we'll see what happens there. They go 8, or they do just send them through waivers or trade them. So we'll see what happens. The offensive line position so far, they have at least 10 on the roster as of right now, of my count. Only cutting really the undrafted free agents, Trey Adams, with his epic combine interview, as well as Marquell Harrell, who they'd like to bring back on the practice squad, and Brandon Walton as well have been cut. But they have their starting 5. You're assuming that Cody Ford and Darrell Williams, who is getting a lot of starting reps. Ty Secchi's in there at 6. Brian Winter's in there at 7. Evan Bain in there at 8. Obviously Ryan Bates at 9, Ike Butker at 10, and John Feliciano at 11. So we'll see what happens at that position group, Ty, but that's where we're at with that. Tight end, they're keeping just their 3 and us, Dawson Knox, Tyler Croft, Lee Smith, Tommy Sweeney to the PUP, Jason Kroom was cut, and Nate Becker was cut. And then obviously their fullback tight end, Reggie Gilliam's on the roster. officially. Running back, straightforward, Singletary, Yeldon, Moss, and then Tywan Jones. They cut Antonio Williams. Don't know what's going to happen with Christian Wade, if they're going to put him on the exemption list or just cut him. We'll see there. And then Davis Webb was cut. Jake Fromm still on the roster as of this moment. That would cap off the offense with still a few cuts to go. So anything shock you there? Anything?
I don't think there's anything real shocking, but where's everyone that said Devin Singletary was the next Barry Sanders last year? I mean, I think, Christian Wade.
Oh. Okay.
I was just looking, his name was just right above it, and I was just having like minor dyslexia there, reading the wrong thing.
Yeah. Okay.
But no, Christian Wade, everyone was like, oh no, Christian Wade's going to be great next year. We don't even need another running back. Christian Wade's going to be the number one. Singletary's going to be the number two. No, like it takes a while. Yes, we saw some flashes from him, but it takes a lot to learn the NFL game coming from rugby. Very different. And to be able to block, to be able to understand positioning and leverage and different things like that, knowing when to chip, knowing when to cut, different little things. It takes a while, and not being able to get any game experience this year with no preseason, it kind of limits him in that making a big impact, because most of the time, even, when you're going, if you want full go in practice, it's still it's not a game situation. It really isn't. And, most of these guys, especially your veterans, you're just thudding. Like, you're not trying to take yourself out of the situation. You're not trying to take your teammates out of the situation. So for the most part, like, you can do some things, but you can't really take a huge step unless you're doing some crazy stuff out there. And it doesn't seem like he was doing that. I think, the Bills will be fine though. Hopefully Singletary, cuts those fumbles down that we've been hearing about. That seems to be an issue, if you will. It's been, a national thing going around in the fantasy football communities.
Right.
So, does that mean Zach Moss is poised for a breakout year? I love the style he brings. If you have that big, tenacious offensive line, if they're able to continue to mash people, you can wear people down late into games. And then that's when Josh Allen can gash you with some big, deep throws. And I think that's a great way to play if you're the Bills this year, having so many more weapons. But if you're able to dictate things the way they did in certain games last season, you're just mashing guys over and over again with that offensive line. And then you just take your shots, mix in that play action. So, they're not just keying in on Josh. He's not having to do too much. I think that's a perfect scenario for your offense.
Yeah, and Christian Wade, I was a fan. I never would have said he was running back 1, running back 2. I was always like, can he be a running back 3? I think it's possible that he could be. Of all people, preseason hurt him the most, one of as much or more than a UDFA who had years of college anyways. It's going to hurt him the most.
He's 29 now.
Here's my point. A lot of people are like, it's a free exemption. Yeah, it's a free exemption, but at the same time, why mess around with it if he's 29 and if he's not in the plan, if he can't make even the regular, here's how I look at it. I don't know if there's stipulations why he can't be in the regular practice squad. Like, let's place him on the regular practice squad in case he's there and we can call him up on a game basis or something. But if you can't even make the regular practice squad, I guess it's a free exemption. I don't know, but
yeah, then is he taking reps from other guys or
even
other
in
young guys?
Setting,
like you have Antonio Williams, a young guy you could bring back onto the practice squad out of UNC. He can do some things, decent size at 5'11", 215. He's built similarly to your other running backs, but a little bigger. And, maybe that's something they want to do is get him more reps. Like, maybe you don't keep Christian Wade on that exemption, but we'll see what they do. I'm surprised, like, we're, 45 minutes now after the deadline, still nothing fully official.
Yeah, no, it's interesting year to be able to hold it out for somehow. Obviously there's a rule, it's been sent in. How it hasn't leaked or why it hasn't been said what that rule is, I don't know. Obviously the transactions are open, meaning the Bills can release their initial set of 53. And then from there, they can make trades still at any point. So I don't know why, even if like we talked about one scenario of keeping Foster just for now, just will release that. So we know at least where they're at as of right now. And going from there. So, offense is pretty straightforward. You're getting into the defense now, Ty. You're keeping your defensive line intact.
Gotta give a shout out to Monster. Monster's tuning in over on Facebook. Shout out Monster. Hopefully he's our representative on Part of My Take. He just has so much vigor, so much enthusiasm for this Bills team. And that's what I love out of the Mafia. We're just always bringing it, just ready to run through a wall for that guy.
Shout out to Monster then. For sure. Monster, leave some comments. Let us know your thoughts on as we go here. Hold
on. What your thoughts like about this backup quarterback position? Because it looks like some guy, Josh Rosen's already available. Right. I saw Nate Geary floating the idea that he could potentially be a better backup option than Barkley, but I don't know about that. But what do you think about them possibly keeping 3 with Fromm on the active roster, or maybe putting him on the practice squad? Where do you think they go with this?
You got to have 3. I mean, that's not even a question anymore. I don't know if you can even mess around with having one on the practice squad. You can have, I think, 4 with 16 practice squad guys. Davis Webb for sure is on the practice squad. Can you do 2 and 2? I don't know. That's risky. Someone could go and pluck him. There's just so many uncertain. It's tough to know exactly how to space this out. You go 2 and 1, 2 and 2, 3 and 1. I don't know the exact number. You absolutely need to have 3, like no questions.
Yeah, I think this is why Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott were so upset when certain things were coming out that weren't supposed to be reported on. And a lot of people were sort of angry that this happened and was, targeted right at Chris Brown, the team's official reporter. But the teams want to do a lot of posturing in these situations. They don't want all this stuff getting out necessarily because they want to be able to, stash some of these guys into their practice squad. They don't want all that stuff out. And I think that comes to a big spot on the Bills roster there with the quarterback. Like if Fromm was just absolutely lighting things up, you don't want that out there. You want people to think,
absolutely not.
He's just trying to learn his way. He's not picking things up real fast. Like he's just a development. He's a project, whatever. So I get where, both sides on that argument were coming from, but you do want to have that anonymity when there's nothing going out there on film really besides the few things that are the reporters are catching on.
Yeah. And it's like what they said about Gilliam too. Like, everyone's like, he looks good. He's making these deep catches. Like, and McDermott's like, he's got a long way to go. I thought that generally holds nothing. You generally doesn't say anything, but he did let that go. So I thought that was actually weird the other way where it was like, that's a weird comment. And then they transitioned to his new number and stuff. And at that point, it was like
tight end, designation. It's very interesting.
Then he made the roster though. So no posturing really.
Is that, I don't know. Is that part of the fact that you realize you're not getting the neck injury to Pat DeMarco and you're not going to have him? Like, was that the big change? Like they thought maybe DeMarco would be available, but then they find out not for a couple of weeks. They negotiate a buyout. They could still sign him back in a few weeks, I guess, and then maybe transition Gilliam to the practice squad.
Yeah, 3 weeks plus the buyout. So I'll call it, if it's
whatever they negotiated on it. Yeah,
you don't really know at least halfway through the season or something. So we'll see what happens there. At least for now, though, if they do anything, Gilliam's got to be a move tight on halfback, type of H-back type of role. So we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, I think you saw some of the dynamic nature from him in college for Toledo. You saw him catch a lot of passes. He can do a lot of similar
things. He plays teams.
Yep, exactly. So like you can figure out ways to scheme him in and get some mismatches and get him open on some chip blocks or things like that, bringing him on motions, using that to figure out certain defensive schemes, things like that. So I think it's a very interesting move, but I think it's something like if you look for the teams who were in the top 8 of scoring last year didn't carry an official fullback on their roster. So it goes to prove and show that you can do it without a full-time fullback. I think if you have legitimate blocking tight ends, you can put them in sort of H-back positions, if you will. You can still bring them into the backfield and most of them will be comfortable at, most of their careers, probably in high school, they had to do similar things. They probably carried the ball a bit. You got to think about, the sort of the pedigree of some of these players and them getting moved because just their size and, college coaches being like, yeah, these guys are big. Let's get them bigger, that type of thing. So they can offer a lot, I think. I think especially Dawson Knox, you saw him grow a lot last year in his blocking. I think he's a big physical guy. Can he continue to evolve on that? I think he's a great dynamic guy. He's quick enough to
Right.
perform in that role if you really needed him to, I think.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be an interesting to see what he does, but there's going to be a lot of flexibility with him. And I think he's part of the offense. So we'll see if obviously with the special teams ability blocking so many kicks in the MAC, we'll see if he's eligible to stay on the roster or if he's going to be in the active roster on week 1. So interesting name to keep an eye on. Definitely going to get some time while Sweeney's down. The bigger question is when Sweeney's back in 6 weeks, do they convert him over to the IR? Do they activate him? I mean, they're going to have to find a spot for him, and Gilliam's the spot. So he at least has a 6-week tryout to see how he does in this role between special teams and that move role you were talking about. I guess it's time to hop over to the defense. As of right now, defensive line still pretty stacked. Not too much news coming out of there, except the aforementioned Justin Zimmer getting cut, Brian Cox hoping to go to the practice squad, Vincent Taylor, Tanzel Smart, a guy that looked good. But Daryl Johnson did make the roster. So you're looking at Hughes, Addison, Murphy, Epinesa, Daryl Johnson, and Mike Love at this moment on the roster. Obviously, they need to make another move at that. The DN spot's already heavy. Obviously, then Oliver, Jefferson, Harrison Phillips, and Vernon Butler are a lock. So that room's probably set at that 4. Linebackers pretty set right now with Edmonds, Milano, Klein, Dodson, Matakevich, and Delshon Phillips. The surprise of the day, Delshon Phillips. I did notice Delshon covering Singletary in snaps. I didn't know if that was due to injuries, but
so it seems like he's a very athletic linebacker, can play on the outside. If he's good enough to cover, legitimate NFL running backs, if he's doing a good job, with Singletary in practice, if he's able to lock down some of these tight ends, even though the Bills, don't have upper echelon guys, if he's proving he can do it against them at an NFL level, then, I'm all for it. He was a Big Ten guy, played at Illinois, was supposed to play in the MAC at first, went to JUCO because of his grades, ended up being an all academic Big Ten guy. So you see, he does have that work ethic. He's willing to do those extra things he has to do, it seems. So, if he's doing that, it seems like a process guy to me.
Yeah. And then, going to the DBU side, the safeties are locked, and Hyde, Poyer, Marlowe, and Jaquan Johnson, who's said to be a standout on teams and has been great so far. And then cornerback, looks pretty locked in. I guess they could trim it to 5. They have 6 right now.
Yeah.
And Trey, Taron Johnson, Levi Walsh, Josh Norman, Saran Neal, and Dane Jackson. They could do something with Jackson, but I'd watch that group. I think they'll hold on to Dane Jackson until maybe.
I think so too, because Neal is sort of a flex cornerback safety.
They need an outside boundary
so it's
guy.
It's like an extra safety / corner. So I think they love that flexibility with what Saran Neal can do. You saw them throwing a little bit more as the season went on last year to him, and he seemed to really grasp it as the season went on. I think he could be one of those guys that sneakily has a breakout year in his role for the Bills.
Right. Specialists are pretty locked in: Bass, Bajorquez, and Reed Ferguson. That's good to go there. We'll always take an eye on punter as cuts happen. Patriots actually just cut their other kicker, by the way. So they're going kickerless. So we'll see if they're a Hauschka destination or what's going to happen there. But New England is kickerless as we approach week 1. So we were talking about 2 kickers. New England said, I don't care what you guys think. We're going to start kickerless. And but from there, they could end up adding 3. So we'll see. We'll see what happens in New England. They have that health protocol. It's pretty worrisome. I'm thinking they're going to put Rowasser on the practice squad maybe, and then worry about our starting kicker or something. But they don't have one.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens there. But it's very interesting to note the lack of kicker after us talking about how many kickers you should keep.
I mean, it's Bill Belichick, so I'm not going to be hypercritical of him in this situation. He's obviously got some sort of plan.
He knows what he's doing.
Maybe that plan involves them getting a worse kicker because he's really trying to tank. Because
not a bad thought.
Football Jesus, touchdown Jesus, T God, Trevor Lawrence out there. Obviously, going to be starting next weekend, I believe. Is it at Wake Forest? I think they're hosting College Game Day next week.
Are they? Okay.
Yeah, so that'll be fun to watch, the number 1 team and the number 1 prospect going into the season this year, Trevor Lawrence. A lot of teams are going to be licking their chops to get down there, but I don't know. It's going to be an interesting season. I think besides the Jaguars, I don't know who's necessarily an easy, definite tanking team. They have a lack of talent down there.
Yeah, no, it's 100%. We'll see what happens. They did cut Carlos Hyde. I know they're banged up at the running back spot across the board. I mean, I don't know. I mean, we'll see what happens with $1 million Cam Newton at this point. He's their X factor. If he's good, they have really good DBs. I mean, if Cam Newton's good, I mean, they could win as many games as they can. If he's not good, it's a bad team. Sonny Michel's coming off that hand surgery. James White's their third down running back. Damon Harris is coming off an injury. There's not a lot to like on the receiver position. They just cut Sanu after trading a second round pick for him. He didn't even make the roster, probably for cap reasons, which shows me they're not trying to win, but they rely on a 2 receiver room with N'Keal Harry and Julian Edelman. Like there's not even anyone else on the roster that would make the Bills. There are 2, one of those gets hurt and they really don't have anything. They're carrying Demir Bird and Matthew Slater, 2 special teamers, Jacoby Myers, another kicker punt return guy, Gunnar Olowski. I mean, it's just nothing there on that roster. The defense is always going to be decent.
No, it feels like he's trying, like if you look at some of the guys they drafted this year, it looks like almost project type guys who are going to need a year to really learn under Belichick until they could possibly, be standout guys. Who was the guy that got out of D2? Can't think of his name. Everyone was in love with him this year going into the draft. He was sort of the darling of the ball, if you will.
From New England?
Yeah.
Did they draft him?
Yeah, he was the guy. He plays like safety, linebacker, like he's like that.
Are you talking about Kyle Duggar?
Kyle Duggar, yeah.
Yeah.
So
okay.
like you look at picks like that, and they're the type of guys that Belichick sort of loves because of their versatility. But can they necessarily step in and play day one in the NFL in all of those roles he wants to use them in? No, probably not. It's going to take a little bit of time, especially not having that preseason experience. So it's going to be interesting to watch. I've seen a lot of prognosticators still have more confidence in New England than they do on the Bills this year. And most of that probably is because of Josh Allen. And it's a give and take on that. As well as I do, the national perception of him. It's much different than the perception of him within Buffalo. And he's proven he can do it. Will he do it? That remains to be seen. But we're hoping he's got all the weapons there he needs. And you look at what Cam Newton has around him in New England to perform, and it's not what Josh Allen has around him. It's not even close anymore.
Yeah, no, I mean, for sure. We'll see. Once again, I'm very interested to know if they go the Hauschka route too. That's something I'm going to keep an eye on at that kicker group. I'm just, for no other reason than I'd hate to have him hit a game-winning kick on us. I don't know. There's something about that. They had all those voluntary opt-outs too, Ty. We didn't really talk about that in New England. Brandon Bolden, Marcus Cannon, Devontae Hightower, Dan Vitale, a fullback. They really like Pat Chung, another starting safety. They like Matt Lacrosse, Marquise Lee, a potential receiver they thought they could do big things with. So there are a bunch of opt-outs there. The defense took a big hit, really strong at DB, like the best DBs in the league as a unit. It's a very strong unit, like you 4 or 5 deep at cornerback, like literally JC Jackson's good. Jonathan Jones is good. Gilmore, McCourty, they like Bethel a lot. They have Kyle Duggar, as you mentioned. Obviously there's, they have Devin McCourty as well. Adrian Phillips. There's a lot of guys there that they like a lot. So it's a good DB unit. That front seven's not going to be as good as it was last year. We'll see what Josh Uche is. Taking the second round, a guy that could be a prototypical, pass rusher, all do everything in that defense type of player. They took Anthony Jennings, a big thumping linebacker too. So we'll see what happens at that position group. And they kind of downgraded there on the defensive line, going to Bo Allen, a guy they overpaid from Tampa Bay. Obviously have Lawrence Guy, Adam Butler, a couple names there, but nothing. Though the nugget of the day, Ty, about New England, we'll get off of them. They cut Michael Jackson and Bill Murray. So both on defense, both cut in the same cuts. I mean, that's pretty good, right?
I didn't even know they were both on the roster, but that's absolutely hilarious.
Yeah, Bill Murray, defensive end.
Yeah, but it's just wild to me. The Bills right now, well, at the Buffalo Creek, they're slight favorites. Other places, they still have the Patriots slight favorites to win the division. I just think what the Bills have added to this team after what they did last season, I don't get why so many people are expecting them to take a step back when I get, sort of the defensive production type stuff. When you look at the variance year to year. And the Bills have had, a top 10 defense the past few seasons. So you would expect some sort of regression, but that usually happens because you overpay one or two guys and you end up losing a lot of your role guys in that. And you have to have a bunch of young guys step in, people who weren't necessarily as fit for that position. But that hasn't happened with the Bills. The Bills have continued to add more depth. And I think they're in a better position on defense than they were even a season ago.
Yeah, and the Jets cuts came out too, so we'll talk about them real quickly. This is their week 1 opponent. Their quarterback position is Darnold, Flacco, and Morgan, their draft pick. They're going with Belgore and P. Ryan at the running back spot. Perryman, Mims, Jamison Crowder, Chris Hogan made the roster, Braxton Berrios. And then they're going to go 2 Smiths there to back up at the receiver spot. Herndon, a good tight end, Griffin and Wesco. The offensive line's completely revamped, and Becton fan, they're going to Lewis, Greg Van Rotten there. They have McDermott still that they capped from the Bills. McGovern's there as well. So much changed offensive line. They kind of copied the Bills mold from last year. The defense, we'll see what they're able to do. I think it's much maligned. It's a lot worse than it's usually been, but they still got Williams, standout, top pick there. Henry Anderson, who hurt Stephen Hauschka. They're going McClendon at nose tackle, pretty underrated nose tackle. Linebacker's not great. Jenkins, Basham, not too much there. Neville Hewitt, Blake Cashman, cornerbacks Desser, and Austin and Poole, Mollett and Wilson, not a good cornerback unit at all.
No, they're going with 5 corners, 3 safeties.
Not great. Marcus May's really good. Really the only guy good back there. McDougald's hit and miss, and then their draft pick Davis.
Yeah.
They're an injury away from being in big trouble in both of those spots, and it's not good to begin with. And it's not a good team. It's not a good team. With Sam Darnold, Le'Veon Bell, if Perriman and Mims are healthy, could they make something happen? Yeah, they're scary enough to make something happen, but they especially like Herndon a lot. It scares me a little bit. But it's not a good unit. It's just, there's nothing good about that team. As I've talked about on the show last week, I hate to play them week 1 only because they can always catch you. It's always a team you'd rather play later, because I like the Jets last year. They were awful. They played one of their best games week 1. And that's exactly, what I was, kind of worried about in this one. I always like to play the better teams first, Ty, because you can catch them off guard. You get them out of the way, and
less film.
Yeah, less film. And in this case, we're the better team. So, we'll have to see what happens there. It's not a good roster, and that's if everyone's healthy.
No, it's not. And I think Denzel Mims might be a sneaky guy you can get later on in your fantasy leagues. You just look at what they have at receiver. They don't have too much. Denzel Mims.
And he hasn't practiced.
Yeah. And I loved what I saw from him at the Senior Bowl and the Combine. I think he's very, very dynamic guy. He can go up high, point the ball. He's got some very good speed as well, some good breakaway speed and routes. He's got some sneaky cuts, and he's just a guy that could make a big impact on a team because they don't have any other weapons really out there. Pretty much everyone's been banged up at the receiver position. Jamison Crowder is the biggest name there.
No, it's true.
And, Herndon, they've had, big aspirations for him after a little bit of breakout time, but he's just been hurt so much and gotten into a little bit of trouble too on the field. So how much are you going to get out of him too? I think Denzel Mims, if you're going to go for anyone on that team in fantasy, he's probably the only guy I'm touching.
Yeah, probably. And at least for week 1 purposes, we'll see if he's even eligible to play. He barely practiced. They're really banged up at that group. So we'll see what ends up happening, or if we're going to see a lot of, Barrios has been banged up too. And Perryman's been banged up. You're going to see a lot of Jamison Crowder, Chris Hogan, which Chris Hogan wasn't even on the roster for longer than a week and a half ago. So offensive line's a wreck. So the good news is that it's a fully new offensive line. They might gel later in the season, but you're talking about a draft pick in Mekhi Becton. You're talking about Alex Lewis, a guy coming over from Baltimore. You're talking about Connor McGovern from Denver. You're talking about Greg Van Rotten from Carolina, and George Fant, a backup in Seattle. So you're talking about nothing.
It's like a patchwork quilt.
Yeah, it could work out. The Bills did something similar, but at least had a little more continuity than that. So we're going to have to see exactly how that plays out, but it's not a good offensive line at all. So it's an interesting group, but it'll be one that at least week one. Maybe the good news is you're getting them kind of a little hurt. You're getting them off of a new offensive line, trading Jamal Adams. Is Adam Gase on his way out on the hot seat, Ty? I don't. There's a lot of talking points with the Jets, which makes them interesting. But I think that's especially at home. They actually did a study that the crowd itself, it does not give an advantage to a team. So there's something to note there. It's the travel, it's the hotel, it's the out of your routine. It's all of that. That's a little bit more traveling west to east coast, east to west coast. Those numbers are terrible.
And the thing is, this year, it seems like teams are more than likely going to be traveling in the morning and then going right to the
less
game
time
rather than coming in, getting acclimated a day or two. You've even seen some teams stay, out west to stay acclimated to the West Coast time, things like that. We won't be seeing that this year. And the Bills have a couple West Coast trips, so I don't love that. But going east to west, I think will be a little bit easier just because, you're going back in time, you're playing later than you're playing earlier than you're used to. I think that's a little bit of an easier adjustment for some of these teams. So, that's something to at least monitor throughout the season. It's going to be a big change for some of these teams.
Yeah, and that new COVID rules are coming in too. We can talk about here breaking kind of, they're not going to do any testing on Sunday. The last test is going to be 8:30 p.m. on Saturday, probably due to the fact that they need to know if they pass that test, if someone's in question.
Yep.
So that both teams have plenty of time to know if he'll be active, not at 10 a.m. on Sunday. So you'll have time, you'll walk in the building and know if XYZ player is going to be available. So that was, I think, the biggest change. No Sunday testing for the COVID. So if you need that Sunday test to pass, unfortunately, you're not going to get it if you can't pass. If you don't get the test, if you don't pass on Saturday, I don't want you anywhere near the field anyways.
Just in case.
Yeah. On either side.
Yeah. We saw those false positives. It looks like they've sort of figured that situation out. I think they're moving to the rapid tests as well. So that should help speed things up too. Shout out the NBA for sort of leading the charge on that one. Make sure that got done. Because it looks like that might be the reason we end up having Pac-12 football this year too, which will be awesome if we can get everything back. Hopefully we get some action as well. It should be a lot cheaper for these programs to do the testing. It's a lot cheaper for the NFL teams to do the testing, obviously, too. Yeah. So, that takes a lot of pressure off some of these teams, I think, knowing that. But it really still all comes down to the players making sure they're doing the proper things they're supposed to do with social distancing, not going out in public, really.
And that's the big one, right?
It sucks. It really does. But it's sort of like the only thing you can do to guarantee you're going to have a season, guarantee you have a chance to win the Super Bowl. And we've heard everything, out of One Bills Drive. It's they want this chance this year. They don't want to give it up. No one ended up really, no one big really opted out because they wanted to have this chance together. They believe in this chance together. And it seems like the players are fully bought into that, at least here in Buffalo.
And you could have opted out, like you said, Ty. I mean, you could have opted out if it was, if it was in your family to do that, if that was your decision, if you didn't want to go to these protocols, if you wanted to hang out with your family more, all are acceptable. But you should have opted out. Maybe that was your decision, but you decided to play. And just like if I had made that decision, I would hope you're not going out in the public and putting your team and staff in jeopardy, like we've seen around the MLB, which was a horrible example of what to do and how to react. Although they weren't in a bubble, they just didn't do a very good job, depending on the team. So it's an interesting discussion. I mean, it's a whole nother factor in this whole situation, but I have good feelings that the numbers are down in the NFL. They're doing the right things. They're getting daily tests, which are now extended. Forgot to mention that is also, as of today, daily testing. I thought that was a given, but it was extended. That is going to continue on for I don't think there's an end date in that, but there apparently was, as of the week one, it wasn't daily. Maybe they thought they were going to go every week. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it was extended to daily testing for those purposes. So it's I'm glad that the NFL has had so long to figure out the right ways to go through this, see what the MLB did, see what the NBA did, and make their own assumptions. And they got lucky. I think they got lucky with being able to know how to take the travel piece of the NBA and then take all the good safety protocols of the NBA and all the travel of the MLB, and kind of mesh it together and say, take the pros of the MLB situation, the pros of the NBA situation, and others. And we're going to make our own. They had that, and they were lucky that this started like post Super Bowl.
Yeah. So another interesting note just came out from Marcel Louis Jacques. Currently, San Francisco and Buffalo are the only two markets in which players are required to wear face coverings on the sideline. This is per the NFL and NFLPA's latest COVID policy. So that'll be something interesting to note. Obviously, it's, we saw some of these concept helmets with the face masks being, put in them. Also the ones with the, the full visor over the entire cage.
Does it say the requirement? Why? Who is that? It can't be a state because other teams are in that state.
It has to do with the specific locale, the specific market.
Well, our numbers are terrible here.
Right now, Western New York is on a bit of an uptick, which is gonna hurt the chances of it to tailgate or attend any games.
Yeah, that was our own fault, I guess, right? It's a discussion for another day.
Yeah.
But you're right. That's got to be the reason, because it's not state specific, or I don't think team specific. So that's got to be the league, looking at numbers in each market and saying, San Fran, you guys got to do it. Buffalo, you guys got to do it for now. And they Ty, shouldn't they be anyways? Or do you not think because of the rapid testing that it's not?
If there's no one in the stands, everyone's tested negative. Like, you could test negative on Saturday and, possibly start to show symptoms, but it's very, very unlikely because the virus should at least be in your system, and you would hope
should be testing for it,
track it at that point. But we've seen some cases where there's been some issues with that before. So, I mean, once you're on the sidelines, what's the difference then? If you have your helmet on, you're touching these guys all over on the field. Once you're on the sidelines, I guess it's an extra precaution, but how much is it really preventing? I mean, not so much when you have these guys sweating all over each other in a contact sport. I mean, I guess it's a little different. It was something like baseball, but I don't know. Oh, we've got the official announcement here. The full release list: Davis Webb, Antonio Williams, Christian Wade, and Andre Roberts, Duke Williams, Robert Foster, Nate Becker, Jason Kroom, Brian Allen,
Marlowe,
Dane Jackson, Cam Lewis, Dean Marlowe, Josh Thomas, Brian Cox, Mike Love, Justin Zimmer, Tanzel Smart, Vincent Taylor, Andre Smith, Evan Boehm, Trey Adams, Markel Harrell, Victor Salako, and Brandon Walton. What are your biggest surprise on there?
Really only one, and it's no third safety. So that's goofy. That's a situation of, we're going to bring you back the second we put Feliciano on IR. That's got to be the player. But as simple as that, Ty, is looking through the numbers here. Cutting Andre Roberts is interesting.
Yeah. Who do you think they're going to have then as the main return guy?
Isaiah McKenzie on punts, Taiwan Jones.
Must be.
Well, people were getting very antsy with saying Andre Roberts was for sure a lock. But no, I mean, the answer
Apparently
was no.
Not,
there's no other way to put that. I mean, Micah Hyde returned punts in his career, but Taiwan Jones is going to be the kick returner. But we don't know. It's one of two players, right? So we don't know if Roberts or Marlowe situationally are going to be brought back. Roberts doesn't go to waivers though, so maybe he's the guy that they bring back. Interesting. They did not post. Everyone was saying about 7 receivers, and they don't do it.
Nope.
They don't go to it, and they don't do it. So
yeah, everyone had that locked in. Basically, we're definitely keeping 7. But Andre Roberts does seem to be, I guess, the surprise move for me. I think a lot of people thought, just from what he offered to the return game last season, that he would be able to secure a spot this year, but it seems like that's not the case, at least right away. But as you've mentioned, we've both mentioned throughout this, they're going to be able to bring some guys back. I think he's probably, it's got to be him or Milo, the first 2 candidates to bring right back to the active roster.
Yeah, those would be the 2 candidates. You may be thinking both could go to the practice squad because there's no rules numbers elsewhere. So they did end up cutting Foster. There were rumblings that Duke Williams is somehow is wanted by San Fran. I don't know how they could already know that. If maybe Duke was told that, because he's been pretty vocal with talking to people, DMs and stuff.
I'm sure his agent's probably talking to people.
I would assume
I'd imagine
that San Fran could lie, but apparently at this point, to our knowledge, San Francisco's looking to put in a waiver claim on Duke Williams. We'll see if that comes to fruition or if that's just his agent drumming up interest. But yeah, there's a lot to digest there. They did go to the 6 receivers. McKenzie was a stone cold lock to the roster that they love him. If they're going to let Robert Foster go, there was no way Brian Dable wasn't going to hold on to Isaiah McKenzie. Was pretty overlooked in the process. Was Andre Roberts. I appreciate them not doing everything they can for special teams. So Kevin's appreciative to them not making every single decision about special teams. They had to keep some talent. They had to do other things. The Delshon Phillips needing the 6th linebacker that no one really knew of is interesting. We'll see how that plays a role, if they'd rather go that route than Dean Marlowe, a guy who is very considered to be the 3rd safety. The team has 3 safeties right now. I guess Saran Neal's kind of that jack of all trades, but they're light at DB. I mean, you're talking about 8. Is it 8?
Yep.
It's 8. That's low.
We were just talking about how the Jets were doing that, and we didn't expect the Bills to do it, and then they did it.
8's low, Ty. So maybe, you know what happened? Here's what happened. How many good safeties? Clinton Dix got cut. You saw, safeties across the league going down like flies, being traded. Harrison, a 3rd round pick from Jacksonville, was traded. There was lots of weird things happening in the safety market, and teams are just like, you know what? If these safeties are floating around, we're going to cut ours, and we're going to be able to know we can keep them on the practice squad or go get another good safety at some point.
Yeah,
the safety market's been bizarre, to say the least, for whatever reason. Jaquan Johnson was the 3rd guy that they'd like to keep. They're going to expose those guys to waivers too. I don't believe Andre Roberts would go to waivers. So the only thing we don't know is if Roberts is the play to put Feliciano on IR, and then they're going to have a deal like they did last year, like they did with Kirk Coleman. So they did that at safety last year. So I don't know. Either Dean Marlowe is going to be immediately put back on the roster, or Andre Roberts would be my take, unless they like someone else around the league. They could have made those decisions last minute. But our own Matt Perino is reporting Andre Roberts and Dean Marlowe expected to re-sign with the Bills tomorrow.
So sounds like we're psychic.
So that means that they'll be putting 2 players on IR, with Feliciano, and who am I missing that could go on IR? Sweeney's already on the PUP. Am I missing someone else hurt that they kept? Maybe we don't know.
Or does the DeMarco just count?
Does he count? Yeah, I might. Placed on reserve PU. So only Tommy Sweeney's being reported on reverse PU. So yeah. I mean, it might be DeMarco going to the IR. That's got to be it. He doesn't show on the cut list, right? No. So it's got to be DeMarco. Okay. So yep, DeMarco was not officially no, because he wasn't officially a move yesterday. So he wouldn't show up today. So DeMarco and the 2 linebackers wouldn't show up today. Voshan Joseph and Corey Thompson wouldn't show up today. No. Okay. So no, it's not DeMarco. He's already off the roster. I'm not sure where the other roster spot frees up from, but someone's going on the IR. So, because it's Sweeney's put to PUP, so someone else will be put to the IR that made the initial roster, at least for 3 weeks. We don't know who that player is. It might shock us. So we'll see what they did cut Evan Bain. So Evan Bain was beat out. Another guy that a lot considered a lock. So he was beat out by Butker and Ryan Bates for that position group. So I don't see the injury offhand, unless I'm missing something very obvious. I don't see the injury, who they would place on the Taiwan Jones. He's been hurt.
Might be.
They might place him and put up Andre Roberts. Yeah. I mean, that's the only one I have right now. If Taiwan can't play for 3 weeks, he's the one I'm leaning toward. I don't know of any other injuries on the roster from players who made the roster. So hopefully it's not someone good. And hopefully it is just going to be a situation where you place Taiwan Jones on the injury list.
But as of right now, we got Jake Fromm on the active roster, the active 53. I mean, you said it. They needed to carry 3 just in case something happens.
3 plus 1, maybe even.
I really wouldn't be surprised if you bring Davis Webb back there for the practice squad. He's been around a little bit. He knows the system well enough that if you really have to throw him out there, I mean, I don't want to throw him out there in an active regular season game, but like if he's got to be a backup, I guess, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, that's a good point. Though there's enough value to keep him developing on the active roster, not expose him to waivers. That's the Bills' thoughts. I was higher on Fromm than a lot were. I loved his play. I watched him since the high school days. I followed him. I watched his QB1 on Netflix. Go watch it if you haven't. Good show. I followed him in college. I thought he was pretty good. Beat out Justin Fields. He's got talent. I don't think he's as for sure terrible. I don't think it's such an easy swap of Josh Rosen for Jake Fromm or something. I think Fromm, the guy they liked, they got good value on. They had a higher, they've admitted they had a 3rd round grade or higher on him. They said 2 rounds they would start to think about Fromm. So at least a 3rd round grade they had on him. They got value on it. They wouldn't have made the pick. He can develop for $700,000, not be active. But you have to have an active tie on the game day. And the team's healthy as far as we know. We don't know yet until Wednesday. But the team's healthy, and you're going to have to put healthy players on the inactive list. So the immediate is 3rd quarterback, perfect to not be able to play. You place him on the inactive list and can point to him if Barkley or Allen, something happens injury-wise or sickness-related. So you have that to say. Fromm was always – I didn't know what to make of the Davis Webb talk. A lot of people said he got beat out by Davis Webb.
Yeah.
I can't confirm that. But to me, I thought he was always a lock. He's 5th round pick. Very rarely, I think it's very limited, like the 11% number that you brought up about claims. It's lower than that, I think, for 5th round picks being cut. There's been a little weird thing going on this year with some day 2 and day 3 picks being traded and cut. The team liked him. They drafted him. You're not going to generally leaning toward they wouldn't have if they like Davis Webb. It's pretty, you spend a 5th round pick elsewhere. You wouldn't have drafted him if Davis Webb, unless it was that vast of a difference, just in one training camp setting, no games, in a training camp setting with one scrimmage, that it was him. We don't know that. So the situations are interesting, but Fromm did deserve the spot. As of right now, he's on the roster. I guess if Davis Webb gets claimed to the practice squad, maybe they then feel more comfortable. I don't know. But as of today, he's on the 53, and we'll see what happens. We know the 2 roster moves that are happening tomorrow. I guess we'll see where those moves come from, Ty, and see how healthy the team is. Any thoughts from you on the final roster? Anything you have?
I think most of it played out very similarly to the way we figured. We were, you and I were speculating it might be 2 guys that you thought were going to make the roster that they were going to be bringing back immediately, and that ended up being the case. It seems like Dean Marlowe and Andre Roberts are the 2 that are going to be brought back right now from Matt Perino and a bunch of other sources. So shout out for them being on that immediately.
Marlowe must not be eligible because that means
he's over 4 years of experience.
Okay. I didn't know that. I know he's right.
He's not waiver eligible. Yeah.
He's right on the border. So he must be right at that number because I know Roberts isn't. Okay. So that's,
so it seems like another smart day from Brandon Beane, making the right moves, getting the right guys to stay around. We'll see what they end up doing with the practice squad. If they end up, poaching any other guys off the waivers, that'll be something we'll have to stay tuned for over the next couple of days. But as the roster is constructed right now, it looks like a playoff team to me, and no huge surprises, especially with, those 2 names that we were saying were the biggest, surprise cuts being brought back tomorrow. So, we'll just have to see, how everything works out come week 1 against the Jets. I'm extremely excited to get the season underway.
Yeah, and I mean, we'll get back at you too. We're gonna have many shows this week where we'll dissect it after first wave's obviously done. We'll get into the second wave of stuff. Obviously we know the 2 re-signings, and we'll get into any future moves. Guys like Fromm, Gilliam stay on, Del'Shawn Phillips stays on. They're gonna do something at DB, I think, beside the Marlowe move. So we'll see if there's any future moves at DB.
Yep.
At linebacker. D-line seems pretty set. Trent Murphy was an over talked about story. No use cutting depth at that position group to get weird with money. You need to have it. They're going to win this year. Maybe if you weren't going to win this year, you cut him. That was a pretty overblown topic. I was always team Trent Murphy. I just thought he had he getting paid a little too much, but I think he adds great depth at that position group. So we'll see what happens if those last kind of guys stay on the roster. Like Butker, a lot of people didn't realize him as a lock. The team went and reclaimed him. They were so upset at losing him after cutting him 2 years ago. They reclaimed him from Kansas City. Ryan Bates, they loved since they traded for him. So there were some pretty big signs. Yep. Obviously, they weren't going to let any of their rookies go, and Hodgins, and obviously not Gabe Davis. So Foster did end up getting cut, Ty. That's kind of where it was at. They probably worked the phones, and teams were like, your team's too good to keep to keep 8 receivers. I'm sorry. You don't want to expose, I guess, Fromm or Gilliam, I guess. You don't want to expose, or Del'Shawn Phillips. You don't want to expose any of those 3 to waivers, especially knowing, I don't know. That's an interesting situation, especially knowing you're going to re-sign Roberts. Your number's still at 6 today. I don't know. I thought they could have done a little bit more there, but I get it. You don't want to mess around with something for a 6th-round pick. Like you really, you don't want to.
As much as you want to try to get every asset you can back for players, you don't ever want to let people go for nothing. You can't really be upset that they didn't make that move, because like you said, I don't know if Del'Shawn Phillips is necessarily on anyone else's radar, but apparently Brandon Beane must have thought so, or Sean McDermott just thought highly enough of him that he wanted him straight onto the roster. So, that might just go to speak to what, the coaches really think of Del'Shawn Phillips. I think that might be more of the case than anything, because he might have been that guy that I think is on the cusp.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's interesting. They didn't want to expose Phillips, like we said, from or Gilliam to the group. I think that's not exposing someone super important, but I'm not in the rooms. I'm not in the special teams rooms.
That's what I'm saying. I think they must have a bigger idea of his role on this team and how he fits in. Maybe in the future, maybe they're grooming him. He seems to be like that athletic mold, similarly-ish to Matt Milano, where he can get, sideline to sideline. He seems to be able to cover pretty much anyone on the field. So, if he's able to continue that, if he's able to continue to grow, that could be, we're looking for someone to fill in for, the loss of Lorenzo Alexander as well. So
we'll see now that cuts are made, now that, chips are on the table. We know potentially Duke Williams claim. We don't know if that's going to hold any water. But they're going to hope. Here's the hope, Tide, to kind of wrap this up. They're going to hope that Foster or Williams, one of them, gets a claim, because at the end of the day, no one says that one of those or both of those aren't going to be on this team in a practice squad capacity and elevated to that 2-man extra unit, or elevated at some point the first injury. They're going to keep 6 receivers on the roster all year. If one injury happens, either of those are going to happen. So they're really banking on the fact the Bills are like, you know what? We're going to get one of those on the practice squad 100%, or you don't cut them both. So we're going to see what happens, because that's huge depth to have, knowing your offense already. Both have been in the system 2+ years. You're going to have that system knowledge. So it's different than going out and getting another semi-talented receiver. These guys are ready to go. They're ready to play. So they're really banking on the fact that Duke Williams doesn't get claimed. And if he does, Robert Foster might be the guy that goes unclaimed. So we'll have to see if they both get claimed. Well, the Bills probably should have exposed Del'Shawn Phillips to waivers. Personally, that's my opinion. I didn't see Del'Shawn this year. He's a guy that they didn't even have in camp last year. He's a guy they claimed in October for the practice squad. They gave him a futures deal. And then, he's a success story, an undrafted free agent that ends up making the roster, as you said, guy that tried to play in the MAC, didn't have the grades and went on to be an academic All-American. So, we'll see what happens, but I don't think that this is over. And I don't think that Gilliam, or Delshon Phillips are on the roster. Do you have any final questions or anything going on? Anything you see?
Nothing else really big going on, but Kev, I'm just going to put you on the spot right here, right now. Give me 3 or 4 names you think the Bills bring back to the practice squad that you think they're fully targeting.
Cam Lewis, number one, probably number one, especially at that 5 cornerback number. He's going to be at the top of the list. Brian Allen, another cornerback that they cut, a boundary cornerback.
Now they cut Dane Jackson. It might be Dane Jackson over Allen, but
true. They cut Dane Jackson. So either or, I guess it's up to them who they like more, or both, all 3, because they only have 5 cornerbacks. Could be as many as 3. Especially Neal can play both safety, so they might be okay there. I know they like Josh Thomas, the safety, was said to play well at in camp, so he's a name to watch out for. Obviously Davis Webb. He's a guy that they're gonna, and then the 2 receivers we talked about, obviously Foster and Duke Williams for sure. Those are the most likely names. They're gonna probably want a tight end there, whether Kroom or Becker. They're gonna probably do something on that front. And then the defensive line, they liked what they saw from Cox and Mike Love and Tanzel Smart. Honestly, there's a lot of good names, and the Bills are deep. So those would be the names I was looking for. And then, they cut their linebacking core, and Dvoshan Joseph and Corey Thompson, a couple of guys that, keeping 6 already and picking Delshon Phillips might not be as big of a need to keep a 7th. But they'll probably have one of the 16 be a linebacker. And they're pretty deep at offensive line. So they might keep one of these guys like a Harrell or Brandon Walton or Trey Adams. But once again, that they're deep at that group, they might have one or 2 there just to have ready. But those are some names to watch out for. And they're going to need, if Taiwan is banged up, they're going to need to have a running back there on the list too. If it's not Antonio Williams or Christian Wade, they got to go get one.
Yeah. I think it's going to be very, very fun kind of to see the way it plays out this year for the practice squad, because normally, you have sort of almost half of it in your mind, at least going in after the cuts, who they're bringing back, and generally it ends up being about 3/4 of the guys that cut end up coming back. Maybe 1 or 2 guys come in off waivers. But this year with the expanded practice squad, it's going to be very fun. There's going to be some names we might not have heard of who could end up making an impact on this team that, that are still completely off our radars. But I'll be tuned in to the cap between you and Jake this week, seeing what's going on with that.
Yeah, no, Ty, thanks for coming on. Obviously we're going to have Jake back on the show. Matt Perino, we have some other guests lined up going forward, for the show. That'll be really big things. I'll actually be on another show, Pumping Up the Cap and Trainwreck, on Tuesday. We're going to do a show with Greg Thompson. And we'll be over there on a group show with the guys from Fanatics, a couple of other guys coming together. So we'll do a group show there. Obviously, tune into our show. We appreciate you tuning in to get our reactions. We talked a lot about the division. We talked a lot about great moves that the Bills are making. It's not done, Ty. So we'll be wrapping this whole kind of saga up as there's at least 2 moves to be made. We got to find out who the second injured player is. I think it's Taiwan Jones. So the Bills are going to be pretty lean at running back for a few weeks. So if they face an in-game injury, man, you're going to have 3 active running backs. They're not going to be able to do the thing where they inactivate Yeldon. So we're lots to talk about, lots to do. But we, as always, we appreciate everyone sticking in this extra long show, but glad to get in all this content.
8 days. 8 more days till Buffalo Bills football. I can't wait. If you need anything for your tailgate, make sure you get Picasso's Pizza, picassospizza.net. You can get anything on there. They got some great specialty pizzas as well. Their subs are fire, and always the pizzas are phenomenal. So make sure you check them out for all your tailgating needs. But that'll be it for the Cap Podcast. Make sure you follow us on Twitter. What's the tag?
Crowd Assist Pod.
Crowd Assist Pod. Make sure you're follow Kevin Massare, follow myself at Ty Buffalo, and that'll be it for us. Let's